Wyoming Territory, summer of 1878. The wind came heavy off the plains that morning, carrying dust and judgment in equal measure as Sheriff Darnell pointed his finger at the woman beside the broken-down wagon just outside town. "She is not fit to be a mother," he said, loud enough for the whole of Red Hollow to hear. Prudence Albright did not flinch. Her face was sunburnt, her skirt torn at the hem, and her right arm still bandaged from the wagon wheel that had snapped loose 2 days back. Her voice, though, was steady. "I did not ask your opinion, Sheriff." Beside her, 2 small children clung to each other, a boy and girl, no older than 6, Clay and Clara. Their cheeks were smudged with dust, their shoes worn to the sole, but they stood behind their mother like little sentries. The sheriff spat in the dirt. "Those are not even her blood. Just picked them up after their folks died in the flood last spring. They belong in the orphanage." "They belong with me," Prudence said. "Woman like you? No husband, no land, no standing? You're dragging them to ruin." A horse snorted nearby. A man dismounted. He was tall, the kind of tall that made other men take a step back. Sun-browned skin, dark hair that curled at the nape of his neck, and the kind of eyes that did not look away from trouble. His name was Hollis Whitlow, and he had been on the trail 2 weeks, driving cattle up from Colorado. He had not meant to stop in Red Hollow, but he had seen her, the woman with the children and the busted wagon, from the ridge. He walked up slow, reins loose in his hand. "Then neither was my ma," he said. Sheriff Darnell turned. "What did you just say?" "I said," Hollis looked the lawman dead in the eye, "my ma was not fit by your standards either. Raised me in a tent behind a saloon after my pa got himself knifed. No schooling, no money, but she raised me right. And if this woman's doing the same, then maybe you ought to keep quiet." The sheriff bristled, but the townsfolk had started to gather. There were whispers. The lawman scowled, then gave Prudence one last look. "Your wagon's in pieces. You will not last the week." "She will," Hollis said, "because I am staying." Prudence turned to him. Her face was guarded, unsure. He nodded to her. "Let me help." That night, he helped her set up camp just outside town where the cottonwoods grew near the creek. He saw how careful she was with the children, washing their feet, brushing out Clara's hair with a comb that had only a few teeth left. She gave them the last of the beans and told them stories while they ate, her voice soft, even when her eyes looked like they had not rested in days. "Why?" she asked him after the children were asleep. He looked over the fire at her. "Because I know what it feels like to be counted out." She nodded but said nothing. He stayed. Mornings, he helped her repair the wagon. Afternoons, he took Clay down to the creek and taught him to skip stones while Prudence stitched up the canvas top. Clara followed him everywhere, silent and curious, holding the hem of his coat when the wind picked up. By the 4th day, the wagon was halfway mended, and Hollis was teaching Clay to ride bareback on his chestnut mare. Prudence watched from the shade, arms crossed. "You are not afraid to get attached?" He looked at her. "I already am." She blinked, startled, but his voice had been gentle, not pressing. He turned back to the boy, who was laughing now, arms raised as he balanced on the mare's back. That night, she sat beside him at the fire. The children were asleep again, curled in blankets, the stars above them wide and bright. "I lost my husband 4 years ago," she said. "He was a stonemason. We had a stillborn daughter, then no more. I was alone when the flood came last spring. Found the children clinging to a fence post. Their aunt said they were too much, so I took them." He did not speak right away. Just reached into his coat and pulled out a small carving, a horse, worn smooth with years of handling. "My ma carved this for me before she died. I was 13. She used to say, 'Family's who you bleed for, not who you share blood with.'" Prudence looked at the carving. then at him. "You think we will make it?" He looked at her firelit face, her worn hands, the fierce way she guarded those children. "I know we will." The next morning, Sheriff Darnell rode back out with 2 men from the orphanage. Hollis was already waiting. "She is not going," he said. "She is breaking the law," the sheriff snapped. "No," Hollis said, stepping forward. "She is making a family. You would rather punish that than help it." Prudence stood behind him. She did not shake. The children stood beside her, hands clasped. The sheriff hesitated, then turned his horse. "You are digging your own grave, Whitlow." "We all do," Hollis said. "But I am choosing who I dig it beside." When they were gone, Prudence walked to him. She did not speak. She just stepped into his arms. His hand came up to her back, slow, steady. That night, they sat close by the fire, their shoulders touching. Clay and Clara were asleep again. Safe. Hollis turned to her. "I meant what I said. I am staying. Not just for now." She looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "So am I." On the 6th morning, Hollis set to work early, cutting fence posts from a stand of juniper 2 miles south of the creek. The wagon had held together through a test haul the day before, and Prudence had spoken of heading farther west before the first frost. But she hadn't said when. He noticed, though, that she'd begun sorting supplies into neat piles, counting jars, wrapping the children's clothes in oilcloth. She was preparing, even if she hadn't yet said it aloud. She joined him near noon, bringing coffee in a dented tin cup and a heel of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. Her cheeks were flushed from the walk, curls sticking to her forehead where her bonnet had fallen back. "You cut all these yourself?" she asked, nodding toward the pile. He took the coffee gently from her. "Didn't see anyone else offering." She sat on a fallen log, watching as he drove a post into the hard ground with steady swings of the maul. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp and certain. "You ever stay in one place?" she asked after a while. "Not in a long time." "Why not?" He wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Too many places where I wasn't wanted, or didn't want to be." She looked down, pulling at a thread on her skirt. "You'd be welcome here." He didn't look up at that, just reached for another post. "Here's not where you're going." She was quiet then, and the wind moved through the trees with a low whisper. "I thought about turning back," she said after a time. "After the wheel broke. Thought maybe I'd made it as far as I was meant to. But you didn't." "No," he set the maul down and turned to her. "What made you keep going?" She met his eyes. "They're not mine by blood, but they're mine, and I'll be damned if I let the world take them from me." He nodded once, slow. "Then I'll help get you where you're going." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "You already have." That night, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a deep, bruised blue, Clara brought him a drawing she'd made in the dirt with a stick. A horse, lopsided and proud, with 4 legs and a crooked tail. She pointed to it, then to his mare. "She likes you," Prudence said softly, watching from where she sat mending a shirt sleeve. "She's got good instincts," he said, crouching down to trace the horse's ear with his fingertip. "You teach her that?" She shook her head. "She taught me." Later, after the children had been laid down beneath canvas and wool, Prudence lingered by the fire. She held a kettle close to the coals, warming the last of the coffee. Her eyes were tired, but there was something settled in them now. "I've got kin in Oregon," she said. "A cousin with a bit of land near the coast. Wrote to me once, said I could come." He leaned back against the wagon wheel, arms crossed loosely over his chest. "What's stopping you?" "Nothing. Not anymore." He watched her pour coffee into 2 tin cups, one of which she handed him. Their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. "You think the boy'd like it there?" he asked. He'd like anywhere he could run and not be afraid. She took a slow sip. And you? He shrugged. I've seen worse places. She nodded, staring into the fire. It's a long way. I've gone farther for less. She turned then, meeting his gaze with the kind of look that didn't ask questions but waited for answers. I'd want you there, she said. He didn't speak right away, just watched the flames curl around the blackened logs. I'd want to be there. The silence that followed felt like something being built slowly, not left behind. She finished her coffee and stood. We'll leave in 3 days. That'll give time to trade for flour and oats. He stood too. You need me to go to town. I'll take the boy tomorrow. She hesitated. He's never left my sight. Then maybe it's time he learns to trust someone else. She studied him, then gave a small nod. He likes you. He stepped closer, close enough that the fire lit the gold in her eyes. Do you? A breath, then two. I do. He lifted his hand to touch her cheek, but didn't. Let it hover there like a promise. She leaned into it, just enough. And in that quiet space, where only the wind moved, something took root. Something lasting. Clay rode behind Hollis the next morning, arms wrapped tight around his middle, eyes wide as the horse picked its way down the narrow trail toward Red Hollow. The boy hadn't said much since they set out, but Hollis could feel him breathing steadier now, tension loosening with every mile. They crossed the dry creek and passed the livery where the smell of hay and horses thickened the air. Hollis slowed the mare to a walk as they reached the general store. You ever trade before? He asked, dismounting. Clay shook his head but didn't look afraid, just curious. Hollis lifted him down. You keep your eyes open. That's the first part. Inside, the store was dim and smelled of kerosene and tobacco. Shelves lined with sacks of flour, jars of preserves, and coils of rope rose unevenly along the walls. The storekeep, Mr. Lockett, barely looked up from his ledger. Hollis dropped a pouch of coins on the counter. Need oats, lard, and 2 pounds of salt pork. And a stovepipe cap if you've got one. Lockett squinted at the boy. Ain't that one of the orphans Miss Albright picked up? Clay stiffened. Hollis's hand stayed loose at his side. He's hers now. That's what matters. Lockett grunted and turned to the shelves. Outside, Clay leaned against the porch rail, watching a dog nose through a pile of potato peels. Hollis handed him a strip of jerky and crouched beside him. Folk'll say all kinds of things, he said. Clay chewed slowly. I know. Mama says they talk when they're scared. Hollis raised a brow. She say what they're scared of? Clay nodded. Things that don't fit. Wind stirred grit across the boards. Hollis looked out toward the horizon, where the sky pressed low over the hills. She's right. By the time they returned to camp, Clara was braiding blades of grass into a long chain while Prudence knelt by the fire pit, laying out flint and tinder. She rose when she saw them, brushing her hands on her apron. Go on, Clay, Hollis said. Show her what we got. The boy ran to his mother, unpacking the bundle with a pride that made something quiet settle behind Prudence's eyes. She touched his shoulder, then looked up at Hollis. You let him carry the salt pork? He insisted. She shook her head, but her mouth curved. That evening, clouds gathered low and heavy, the kind that didn't say whether they'd bring rain or just hang there, brooding. Hollis hammered the final iron brace into the wagon's axle while Prudence packed the dry goods into the wooden chest at the rear. Clara tucked the last of the grass chain into the corner of the trunk. There's a weight to it now, Prudence said, tying a length of rope around the chest handles. Not just food. Feels like a plan. Hollis leaned against the wheel. You ever been near the coast? She shook her head. Only read about it. Aunt had a book of sketches once. Said the air smelled like iron and salt. said it made a woman feel small in a good way. You think you'll like that? She paused. I don't know, but I want to find out. He watched her for a long moment. There's a river just west of the pass. Runs clear even in summer. We could follow it for a time. Easier trail for the wagon. She didn't answer right away. Just looked at him, not searching but deciding. That your way of saying you're coming with us? His voice didn't change. I already said I was. But this sounds more like a man making a life than offering help. He nodded once. It is. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of wet sage and distant rain. She crossed the space between them. Then you'll need to know I'm not easy. I never thought you were. And I won't be led. I'm not the leading kind. I walk beside. Her expression didn't soften, but her hands found his, calloused palms fitting like they'd done it 100 times. He said, I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. I'm not offering anything I don't mean. Then neither of them spoke, because there wasn't anything left to say. That night, the first drops of rain came soft, tapping against the canvas overhead. Inside the wagon, Clay and Clara slept close, their breath steady. Hollis sat at the edge, legs dangling, shirt sleeves damp. Prudence joined him without a word, blanket around her shoulders. She watched the dark trees sway. You think the rain will last? Maybe, but it'll pass. She leaned her shoulder to his. So will everything else. He turned toward her. Not everything. He touched her hand, careful and sure. She didn't pull away. Outside, the fire hissed in the drizzle. Inside, something enduring settled between them, quiet and unshakable. The wagon rolled out of the cottonwoods before sunup, wheels creaking in rhythm with the soft groan of harness leather. Hollis walked ahead, leading the mare. Prudence kept the reins light in her hands, letting the horses set their pace. Clay and Clara sat nestled among sacks and trunks, wrapped against the morning chill. The air held the hush of a world not yet awake. They followed the ridge westward, skirting the edge of a dry basin where jackrabbits darted through sagebrush and the sky ran wide with pale gold. By midday, the trail narrowed into a slope flanked by shale and low pines. Prudence pulled the team to a halt. This pass, does it run all the way through? Hollis shaded his eyes. If we stay just below the ridgeline, it'll bend south and meet the river before dusk. There's a clearing with a stand of birch. Water's clean. She nodded, but her gaze lingered on the narrow track ahead. You certain the wheel'll hold? I checked every bolt before we left. It'll carry us. She didn't answer, only flicked the reins gently and eased the wagon forward. Midway through the pass, the road gave way to a shallow dip where the ground turned soft with last week's rain. The back axle groaned, then caught. Hollis dropped the mare's lead and moved to the side, boots sinking into the muck. Hold steady, he called. Prudence braced her foot and leaned her weight, keeping the team from shifting too fast. Hollis wedged a flat stone beneath the wheel. The wagon rocked once, then steadied. Try it now. She clicked her tongue. The horses strained forward. The wheel caught traction and rolled free. Once clear of the dip, Clara clapped her hands softly, but Prudence only exhaled and glanced at Hollis. You always that calm when things go wrong? No, he said, brushing mud from his hands. Just learned worrying don't lighten the load. They made camp near the birch grove that evening. The river whispered against its banks, and the wind smelled faintly of pine sap and damp rock. Prudence hung a lantern from the wagon's edge while Hollis stripped bark for kindling. Clay practiced skipping stones, but Clara stayed close to her mother, holding one of her apron ties between her fingers. She's quiet today, Hollis said, crouching to light the fire. Prudence tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes all she wants is to be near. He nodded, watching the flame catch along the bark. You ever think about teaching? She looked up. Teaching, reading, numbers. You've got a way of explaining things. Makes people listen. She sat beside the fire and pulled her shawl tighter. I taught my younger brother once, before he went to Kansas City. But I haven't thought of it since. He passed her a strip of dried trout wrapped in waxcloth. Maybe you ought to. She considered him. You think I'd be good at it? I think you already are. They ate quietly while dusk fell around them. The children drifted toward sleep, their bodies folding naturally against each other under the quilt. Hollis leaned back against a stump, stretching out his legs. Prudence stayed seated, hands resting on her knees. You ever want your own? She asked after a while. He didn't answer right away. I thought I might once, but by the time I found steady ground, I figured it was too late. She watched the firelight flicker across his face. And now, he met her gaze. Now's not too late. She looked down, then back up. I'd want it to be with someone who doesn't walk away when the trail gets hard. I don't walk away, he said. I know. That's why I'm asking. He reached for her hand. Then you've got your answer. She didn't pull away, and she didn't speak. She just turned her palm to his and held it steady. Later, after the fire burned low, she rolled out a spare blanket beside the wagon and lay down beside him beneath the stars. The night was cool, but their shoulders touched, and neither moved. You know what I miss most these last few years? She said softly. He waited. Laughter. The kind that comes easy without thinking. He didn't say anything, only reached across the space between them and brushed his thumb along the back of her hand. We'll have that, he said, and she believed him. They crossed into Idaho Territory by early August, following the river as it curved gently westward through a narrow valley. The trail widened through a basin of yellow grass and fireweed, and Prudence kept her eyes ahead, watching how the horizon turned from blue to copper by midday. The children had settled into the rhythm of travel without complaint, dozing in the wagon or gathering twigs and dry moss when they stopped to cook. Hollis walked beside the lead horse most days, his steps sure, his silence never heavy. That morning, they came upon a shallow ford. The river was low, but the current moved fast, glinting with silt. Prudence pulled the team to a halt and scanned the bank. We could camp here tonight, Hollis said. Let the horses rest. That back left hoofs wearing faster than it should. She stepped down from the wagon and crouched by the water, trailing her fingers through the current. You think it's the shoes? Could be the angle of the load. I'll knock the edge off after supper. She nodded and stood. I'll boil water then. The children could use a wash. He turned toward the trees. I'll see if there's anything worth catching. By late afternoon, he'd come back with 2 trout and a handful of wild mustard leaves. Prudence cooked them with salt and a strip of lard, and they ate on rolled blankets while the children splashed in the shallows. Clara had found a feather and stuck it in her braid. Clay skipped rocks until the sun dipped behind the ridge. After the fire burned low, Prudence stood brushing ash from her skirt. You ever think about what comes after we get there? Hollis leaned against the wagon tongue, arms loose at his sides. I do. She didn't move. Tell me. I'd like to build a home near that cousin of yours. Nothing big. 2 rooms. Porch. Keep a few goats maybe. She watched him in the dim light. And after that? He looked toward the children, now curled together under one of the quilts. Teach Clay how to mend tack. Let Clara run wild in the fields until she's too tall for her shoes. Prudence stepped closer. And me? He didn't hesitate. You'd have your own chair by the stove, a garden of your choosing, and no one telling you what you can or cannot do with your own life. She rested her hand against his chest. I wouldn't want to do it alone. You won't. That night, she didn't lay her blanket beside his. She laid it over his legs and curled in beside him, her head against his shoulder. Neither of them said anything more. Over the next weeks, the land softened. Forests thinned into rolling fields, and the wind carried the scent of fir and sea salt. One evening, just before dusk, they crested a slope and saw the distant line of the Pacific silver and endless. Prudence stood at the wagon's edge, one hand shading her eyes. "That's it." Hollis nodded. "That's it." She didn't speak for a long while. Then she turned and reached for Clara, lifting her onto her hip. "We made it." They settled on the cousins' land 2 days later, a modest homestead with a low barn and a fenced garden. The cousin, a broad-shouldered widow named Ruth, welcomed them without hesitation, her gray-streaked braid tucked beneath a wide straw hat. "You'll have to start with canvas walls," she said, pointing to a bare patch of earth. "But it's good soil, good light." They pitched the wagon canvas into a lean-to and spent the first 3 nights beneath it, sleeping close against the chill. Hollis cut cedar posts and split them smooth with an axe Ruth lent him. Clay followed him everywhere, mimicking the swing of his arms. Clara helped Prudence plant onions along the fence line. Weeks passed. The walls of the house rose plank by plank. Prudence found a rhythm in the planting peas, turnips, and the late potatoes she'd kept wrapped in burlap since Wyoming. Ruth gave her a milk goat, and Clara named it Dot. One evening, as the roof beams were nailed into place, Hollis stood back and wiped sawdust from his brow. "It's more than I pictured." Prudence stood beside him, arms folded. "It's only the start." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it good." Clay called from behind the garden fence, waving a crooked stick like a sword. "We saw a fox." Hollis turned to him. "Did it see you?" Clara threw a stone. "It ran." Prudence laughed softly. "She's braver than most." "She gets it honest," Hollis said. That night, they lit a lantern inside the half-finished house and sat on crates around a borrowed cook stove. Ruth brought stew and a loaf of bread still warm from her hearth. The children fell asleep with their heads on Prudence's lap, and Hollis poured her a cup of chicory coffee boiled dark and bitter. "You think we'll stay?" she asked, quiet. He looked around the beams, the shadows, the walls not yet sealed. "I think we already are." She reached for his hand and held it under the table, her fingers steady. "I never expected to feel safe again." "You're not just safe," he said. "You're home." And she was. They married the next spring under the apple tree Ruth's husband had planted 20 years before. The children stood beside them, hands full of wildflowers. Hollis wore his best shirt, the sleeves mended once by Prudence's careful stitching. She wore a dress Ruth helped sew from calico bought in town, and a single ribbon in her hair. They built a life from wood, earth, and slow mornings. Clay grew taller and leaner, helping Hollis with the fence line and learning to read by lamplight. Clara kept the goat close and asked questions about every plant in the field. Prudence taught children in the valley 1 day a week, her voice calm, her hands always moving. Hollis would wake before dawn, brew coffee, and sit at the porch while the sky shifted from gray to gold. Prudence joined him, sometimes with her sewing, sometimes with just her presence. They didn't always speak. They didn't have to. Love for them was built in the quiet, in the way he checked the windows before bed, in the way she laid out his shirts clean each Sunday, in the way they watched the children run without fear. And when the first rain came that fall, washing the dust from the roof and making the earth smell new again, they stood in the doorway together, her head against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They had come far, farther than anyone thought they would. And they were exactly where they were meant to be.